Hungary on December 5 formally ruled out issuing Eurobonds to support Ukraine, making it clear that Budapest will not back new joint European borrowing for Kiev at this stage. These Eurobonds were supposed to act as a financial fallback for Kiev if the European Union failed to move ahead with using frozen Russian assets, giving Ukraine an alternative lifeline for much-needed funding. On December 3, the EU had floated an offer to issue around $104 billion in Eurobonds if its proposed reparations loan plan could not be implemented, positioning the bonds as a contingency mechanism for Ukraine's support package. Under that scheme, the loan would be repaid by EU member countries in proportion to the size of their economies, effectively spreading both the costs and the responsibility across the bloc according to national economic weight. However, raising fresh debt through the EU budget to support Ukraine requires a unanimous vote by all member states, meaning a single government's opposition is enough to block the entire initiative. Hungary's snub could therefore derail the European Commission's Plan B to the direct use of Russian assets, throwing into doubt one of the key backup options Brussels had been developing for Kiev's financing. This setback comes as the bloc is already struggling to find a legally and politically workable way to fund Ukraine using frozen Russian assets, with divisions deepening over how far the EU can go without triggering legal challenges. It is worth remembering that Russian assets worth about $240 billion were immobilized in Europe after the Ukraine war began, locking away a vast pool of state and central bank funds. The European Union now wants to use those assets to underpin a $190 billion reparations loan for Ukraine, effectively leveraging the frozen money to raise large-scale support for reconstruction and defense. Under the proposal, Ukraine would repay that loan if and when it receives compensation payments from Russia after the war ends, tying the debt to any future settlement or war reparations framework. The EU would use the remaining $50 billion from those assets to cover loans already issued to Ukraine in 2024, helping shore up earlier emergency support that is already on the books, as per reports. However, Belgium has strongly opposed the plan because it holds the majority of these Russian assets, and Brussels is wary of the financial and legal exposure such a move could bring. The Belgian Prime Minister maintains that the loan structure exposes Brussels to significant legal risks without adequate shared liability from the rest of the EU, arguing that the burden should not fall disproportionately on Belgium. After failing to reach an agreement in October, EU member states will once again return to the issue later in December, hoping that further talks can bridge the remaining gaps. Amid this tense debate, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán sharply criticized the European Union on December 5, using the moment to renew his broader political attacks on Brussels. Orbán declared that the EU is claiming the moral high ground despite, in his words, drowning in corruption, suggesting that the bloc lacks the credibility to lecture others on governance and transparency. His remarks came just as a corruption scandal jolted the EU earlier this week, giving him fresh ammunition to question the integrity of European institutions. The European Public Prosecutor's Office has accused 3 high-profile suspects of corruption and fraud, further fueling public scrutiny of how EU funds and influence are managed. Orban then drew a pointed parallel between the EU scandal and Ukraine's alleged $100 million energy sector graft, arguing that Brussels is overlooking Kiev's problems while facing similar issues at home. The Hungarian Prime Minister shared via X, and I quote, "The EU is drowning in corruption. Commissioners face serious charges. The Commission and the Parliament are engulfed in scandal. Yet Brussels claims the moral high ground. Corruption in Ukraine should be called out by the EU. But once again it's the same old story, Brussels and Kiev shielding each other instead of confronting the truth." Hungary's foreign minister also accused the EU of being reluctant to expose Ukraine's corruption, claiming that political considerations are preventing a full and honest investigation. Peter Szijjártó said that Brussels is riddled with a corruption network similar to Ukraine's, implying that this shared vulnerability undermines the EU's stance on the war and on financial aid. There's this newer Brussels corruption case. You see, at the last Foreign Ministers' Council meeting, it was strange that no one mentioned the huge corruption scandal ongoing in Ukraine. No one demanded accountability from the Ukrainians for the hundreds of billions of euros in European Union support after it was revealed that organized corruption occurs at the highest state levels in Ukraine, and the euros of European taxpayers ended up in the hands of a war mafia. I think it is now clear why Brussels does not hold Kiev accountable. Well, it's because exactly what is happening in Kiev is happening in Brussels. Massive corruption is happening here too. Just now another skeleton has fallen out of the closet, as the former High Representative of the European Union, the Vice President of the Juncker Commission, has been arrested on corruption charges, and similarly, the former Secretary General of Foreign Affairs for the Ursula von der Leyen Commission has also been arrested. On the same suspicion of misusing European Union funds, following a house search at the former Justice Commissioner of the von der Leyen Commission due to money laundering. So exactly the same thing is happening in Brussels as in Kiev. Huge corruption scandal in Kiev, huge corruption scandal in Brussels. And obviously in Brussels they don't want to pay too much attention to the Ukrainian corruption network, because Brussels is also interwoven with a similar corrupt network, and they don't want to expose this to the light. This is the takeaway of today, or at least of this news.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that look, you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HD videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.